Good morning, how are we all doing today? So for today's video, I'm going to be painting some monochrome portrait studies. I thought it would be nice to do a chill little sketchbook painting session and just chat and check in with you guys. First off, I hopped onto Pinterest and found a couple of portrait references. Once I had a few references to go with, I started lightly sketching them out onto the page with some super faint lines. I always start with these soft lines that are usually quite blocky in shape, mapping out the outer silhouettes and the general placement of features like the eyes, the nose and the lips. I tend to do this as a way of translating the reference into simplified shapes, just kind of seeing the bigger picture to start with. It's a way of me mapping things out without focusing too much on the details just yet. I'll pencil in the jawline, the neck and even the head shape as almost rectangular forms in this initial sketching stage. And once I do have those simplified shapes and features mapped out in place, I then go in with a darker pencil and start focusing on the little details and refining things to make sure the placement's all correct. And then afterwards I usually clean up my line work again with the darker 2B pencil. But this time I wanted to try using a coloured pencil for line work. I always see other artists do this with their line work. They use like a red or a blue coloured pencil, and in the end it achieves a brighter, less intense finished line work effect, since it kind of gets hidden underneath all the paint. So I figured I'd give it a try and see what it does for my paintings. Once the coloured line work was all done, it was time to paint. I painted the first layer as a really light wash using alizarin crimson and filling in the whole silhouette shape of her head. To make the highlights, I made sure to leave specific areas on her face unpainted, like her cheekbone, eye and nose bridge. Then in a second layer of the same colours but slightly darker, I deepened some of the mid-tones to create some form and depth to her face as well as her bandana. With a slightly more pigmented wash of paint, I'm using a pooling technique to slowly build those forms around her face. And for the bandana, I used sharp and angular shapes for the shadows, trying to imitate the texture of fabric crinkling. In this third and final layer, I'm using a much less diluted alizarin crimson and painting in what would be considered the shadows or the black of the photo reference. You can immediately see the difference this makes with just a few small brush strokes. This simple layer creates all the necessary details for us to recognize the portrait as a face and the light source. This singular brushstroke of the jaw shadow was definitely one of the most satisfying moments. I did get a bit bored of seeing just pink, so I ended up adding a little bit of purple just to spice things up a little bit. With this next portrait, I applied the same process. Basically, my goal for these studies was to paint in 2 or 3 layers, focusing purely on the highlights and shadows to achieve as much detail as possible with fewer layers. In other words, highlights, midtones and shadows. I would be using that first layer to create the silhouette and place the highlights of unpainted areas, the second layer to create more depth in the midtones, and the third layer using the most pure and dark shade to substitute for blacks and shadows. Here I'm just using an undiluted paint in what would be the blacks or the shadows from the portrait reference. Immediately, even the slightest details of this dark blue makes a world of difference in this portrait study. Now, this third portrait was probably my favourite one. The layering and building of shadows just went so smoothly, and it was just fun to execute. I also feel like I really nailed the detail of her likeliness and soft expression. I find that when drawing portraits of people, I get super self-conscious about whether I can actually achieve the true likeliness of a person. I tend to sometimes fill in gaps based on my own assumed anatomy knowledge rather than always drawing from observation. It's why I admire caricature artists so much. They have this honed skill to immediately capture someone's features and even exaggerate and distort them, but still make them look very much like them. It's a skill that I envy so much. For example, I might be drawing someone from observation, but in some parts, like the eyes or maybe the nose or something, I'll just make up parts of the face based on my anatomy experience rather than capturing it from observation. But again, I got bored of just orange and decided to spice things up a little bit by throwing in a complementary teal shade to build the shadows instead. While this teal isn't exactly a dark shade, the sheer contrast of the orange and the teal itched something in my brain and it just felt so fun and satisfying. Definitely a color combination I need to revisit again. So while I paint these last two portraits, let's have a chat. How are we all doing? How's everyone's 2024 going so far? Last year I took a year off YouTube, and in that year of absence, a lot has changed and happened. One of the most exciting things that's happened is that I've since worked with Magic the Gathering, and that has been the most insane experiences to date. Almost 2 years ago now, my own set of cards was released in what's called a secret layer artist drop, and I had 4 of my own artworks printed officially on these cards. I woke up one day and just received a flood of emails from people congratulating me on the set, since I had no idea when it was coming out, so I was just as surprised as everyone else. I've continued to work with Magic the Gathering on a few artworks since then, attended a few Magic events, and have been lucky enough to be warmly welcomed by the incredible community thus far. It's honestly been such a surreal experience, and I'm hoping to continue working with them in the years to come. What else? Last year I also had my first gallery exhibition in a few years. My last gallery show was back in 2020, and after that I had a pretty bad burnout, so I had to take a step back from some gallery work, but finally feeling in a much better place. Last year I showed at Corey Halford Gallery in LA, a small collection of works which centered around the theme of fables, which was pretty sick. As of late, I've also been trying to experiment a lot more with pushing comfort zones again. Over the past few years, I've honestly rarely sat down to just paint for fun, which is why this sketchbook has been going on since 2021 and is still incomplete. So I've been trying to get into a habit of cracking open this very same sketchbook to try new techniques and experiment with different processes. I've actually come up with a bunch of new things that I'm pretty excited to explore further and take into this next era of my work. In even more exciting news, over the past few months I've actually been working on probably my biggest project to date. It's something child me would never have dreamed would become a reality, and I'm pretty sure I can talk about it now because by the time this video's out, I think I would have already announced it. It's my own art book. It's something I'll talk a bit more about further on, but it's coming out next month in May, so if any of you guys are interested or want to know more about it, I probably have already shared more information about it on my Instagram and my other socials. So yeah, that's a quick summary of some things that have been going on recently. Now, this last portrait was pretty interesting to work on because I had to figure out how to shade defined muscles. Muscles often don't have harsh edges or forms, so I find that there's a very fine and subtle line between highlight and midtones. A bit too harsh and muscles end up looking unrealistic and your subject looks roided up, while anything too subtle, you wouldn't even know that muscle was there. Kind of tricky, but fun to learn and figure out. with all the studies done, I decided to add some razzle dazzle and just threw in some splashes of colour and washes to the background. Totally unnecessary, but I thought it would bring some of the portraits more forward and also add some colour to the spread. Just a nice little finishing touch. Anyway, that brings us to the end of today's video. This was meant to just be a chill, draw, paint and chat session, so I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you guys didn't mind just hanging out with me as I did some portrait studies. As always, I hope you guys are having an awesome day. Don't forget to make more art, and I'll see you guys soon.